This is my demonstration speech for public speaking. My audience: Kylene, Mom, Riley, and Dad. Candles are an item most of us use in our house on a regular basis, but they can often be quite pricey. Today, I'll show you how to make a candle from scratch. Candles have been used for thousands of years, but not much known as about their origin. The earliest records of candles took place in ancient Egyptian times. Candles have changed drastically throughout these times, from the use of animal fats creating a quite potent smell to the use of beeswax creating a sweet scent. Present day, candles are used as an air freshener, bringing a sweet smell to any room. A couple years ago, my parents started making soap, and they asked me if I could try and make candles for a Christmas present. After some research, I decided to follow a recipe from Candle Science, and using some knowledge from using the ingredients in candle making already. Today I'll demonstrate how to make your own candle from scratch, including the preparation needed in order to make one, melting and fragrance, and how to pour and use one. The very first thing you need to do in order to make a candle is prep your area. Candle making can get quite messy, and so laying down newspaper is perfectly reasonable. Wax is very hard to clean up, and so it can be easily avoided by laying down some newspaper. Another thing about wax you should keep in mind is that when melted, it can get quite hot and can cause burns, so you should always be very careful when handling and pouring it. The next thing you need to take into account is what type of container you want to use for your candle. According to David Fisher, some things you need to keep in mind when choosing a container for a candle is: will it catch fire, will it crack, and will it leak? If the container you've chosen to make a candle with says yes to any of these questions, then I would recommend choosing a new container. A container like this, a mason jar, is a perfect container for a candle. It won't crack because it's used to taking on heat. It won't leak because it's a jar, and it won't catch fire clearly because it's glass. To start making candles, you'll need the following: the desired amount of soy wax to fill your container. So this, you can see on the side, it says milliliters. So you can use a scale to measure out your milliliters. So I would need 150 milliliters to fill this glass. A candle fragrance of your choice. You'll need the amount of fragrance that will take up 6% of your mixture. So if I use, let's say, 50 ounces of wax, I will need 3 ounces of fragrance. A digital scale to measure out your fragrance as well as your wax. A container for your candle, we've already gone over that. A thermometer, a candle wicks, and candle stickers, so you can put your wick inside your candle container. A medium saucepan, and a separate container to melt your wax in. Now that you've taken all the precautions to make a candle, we can start the melting process. You need to fill a medium saucepan halfway with water and put it on the burner on medium-high heat. Next, take the amount of soy wax that you plan to use to fill your container and place it into the separate container that you're going to melt your wax in. Place this container into your saucepan and let it melt. Be sure you keep track of how much wax you use, that way it'll be easier to figure out how much fragrance you'll need in the future. Let your wax reach 150 degrees. At this point, you need to turn off your burner and measure out your fragrance. Once you've measured out your fragrance, add it to your jar and mix it. Let this cool to 135 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point, while you're letting your wax and fragrance mixture cool, you can work on adding a wick to your jar. First thing you want to make sure is that the wicks you bought are taller than your jar. Once you've found the correct wick, take a wick sticker, which is a sticker used to apply the wick to the bottom of your jar, or hot glue, and put it in the middle of your jar. If you can't reach the bottom of the jar, then you can also use chopsticks or a straw or anything long enough to reach the bottom of your jar. Once it's centered, take a skewer and wrap the wick around the skewer and tape it to the top of the jar so the wick is centered and it doesn't move while you're pouring wax into it. Now that your wax is cooled, it's time to get pouring. Line up your containers so it makes the process a lot easier and less messy. Pouring the wax is probably the most messy part of the entire the entire process. Once you've lined up your containers, use heat protection such as hot pads or gloves and pick up your container of wax. At this point, it shouldn't be overly hot, but it can still burn you. Pour your wax into your containers until it is about until there's a fourth of an inch at the top of the container. That way you have room to burn the wick once it's set. Repeat this for all of your candle containers. Let the candles cool, and once the wax is hardened, you're able to cut the wicks and remove the skewers. You should let your candles sit for a couple weeks or at least 4 to 5 days for the best results. Now that I've shared with you how to make a candle from scratch, including the preparations you need to take, the melting and how to add your fragrance, as well as pouring and how to use, I'm sure you'll be able to do this by yourself. In summary, making candles can be a fun activity to do when done so correctly. As long as you prepare your workspace, use the correct containers, don't overheat your fragrance, and wait before cutting your wicks, everything will go smoothly and you'll have a candle by the end of the process. There's never any harm in having too many candles.